Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We begin today on a ranch in Payne County where extension experts from across the Great Plains are teaming up to study how one producer is managing an issue that a lot of landowners have to deal with.
I'm the only one around here. There's me and one other person over west that practices rotational grazing.
This project is a 5-year project. We have the University of Nebraska, we have Oklahoma State University, and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension and AgriLife Research. So this project is really focused on outreach and education for the practices and management practices for the control of woody brush encroachment. So woody brush encroachment is a problem that we all face throughout the Great Plains, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And so a very common problem for a lot of ranchers and a lot of landowners.
Fire, I use fire in the springtime. That's a huge issue here. We've got the eastern red cedar that's just taken over most of these ranches. Blackberry bushes, they're coming in. They're very invasive. And we're trying to get away from the use of herbicide and use more fire and our goats.
This is part of a USDA grant that we received. We're partnering with innovative ranchers, and these ranchers are either using prescribed burning methods or they're using goats and sheep to help control woody plants, mostly goats, but hair sheep as well. And so we're trying to identify how that's worked for them, what has been successful, what hasn't been successful.
There's a lot of management practices that have been underutilized because of that lack of education or outreach. And so we're really trying to work hard to get the research out to the people, out to the landowners and the ranchers, so that they can start utilizing prescribed fire and multi-species grazing and the combination of those practices to combat woody brush encroachment throughout the Great Plains.
Typically we'll burn about 1/3 of the ranch every year. We noticed that we needed to do that for cedar control. But we'll rotate the goats in there behind the cows and rotate those around on these sections. And those goats have been controlling a lot of the new growth on the oak trees after we either clear them or any new oak trees. And they're also great weed control.
So San Angelo, Texas is the hub, is the place for small ruminants. We do a lot of work with goats, with sheep. But we haven't really been able to embrace the fire culture yet. And that's something where I hope the ranchers from Texas can learn from the ranchers in Oklahoma who do have a really healthy fire culture and are very active in prescribed burn associations.
You look at it in other states, fire has been totally taken out of the picture for decades, if not even a century or so in some of their cultures. And again, it's needed, but trying to get that back in. And the nice thing is, it is slowly creeping back in. People are realizing that fire is one of the only things they have left to use. They realize that it's important.
It's so cool because it's the first time it's ever been done. We're combining all the efforts of extension agencies throughout the Great Plains from many different states. And so we all have different strengths and weaknesses, and we're able to feed off of each other and work together to achieve this common goal. And it's really a collective effort that has not been done before. And so it's going to bring a new side to extension and a new way to deliver the information to the people.
Hi, Wes Lee with your weekly Mesonet weather report. A few weeks ago, I visited with you about wheat degree days and how they were a little behind normal. This week, I wanted to focus on a related topic called wheat growth days. The wheat growth day counter provides a count of the days since planting with positive degree day heat units. We get positive degree days anytime the average daily temperature exceeds 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Another way to think of this is just how many days did the wheat grow even just a little bit since planting. This table shows growing days for wheat planted on the 1st of October at 2 locations. As of January the 28th, Alva had accumulated 75 growing days this year. This falls close to the 5-year average for the site, which was 78 days. Tipton came in a little higher with 97 growing days. just slightly ahead of the 5-year average of 92 days. Now that we know the number of growing days for a site, what is it useful for? It is data needed by farmers that utilize enriched strips and have access to a handheld green seeker machine to adequately determine the need and value of top dressing the wheat with additional nitrogen fertilizer. For more information, visit the OSU website at nue.okstate.edu. Gary is up next with drought and rainfall information.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, we had a lot of excitement this week with all the snow up in northwestern Oklahoma. What'd that do to the drought monitor? Let's go take a look. As you can see, we have very little drought left in Oklahoma, just that little bit of drought in the far southwestern corner of the state. That's moderate drought, the lowest drought category. Hopefully we can get rid of that with another good rain or even snow event, so let's keep working on that. Now, speaking of good rains, let's take a look at the Oklahoma Mesonet rainfall map for most of January. This is through January 28th. We can see some pretty good rainfall amounts from near 8 inches down across parts of southeast Oklahoma, up to about 3 to 4 inches in the center part of the state along the I-44 corridor. And then we go from about 1 inch to 2 inches across the far northwestern parts of the state, really down to the northwestern quarter of the state. Now, out in the far western panhandle, we still have less than a quarter of an inch to go for January so far. And that's the area with the worst drought, of course. If we look at the departure from normal rainfall map for that same time frame, we see again most of the state has some pretty good surplus moisture for January, from 3 to even as much as 5 inches above normal. And as you know, it's also been pretty warm. If we look at the amount of freezing weather, at least for January, we go from really just about 30 to 40 hours down in the southern parts of the state to about 250 to 300 up in the northwestern parts of the state. So not a lot of cold weather so far during January, and really during the winter altogether. The lowest temperature we've recorded on the Mesonet, around 4 to 5 degrees up there in the western panhandle. So we'll take any type of rain or snow out in the far western panhandle to get rid of that drought, and of course southwest Oklahoma needs a bit of rain or snow as well to get rid of it down there. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
A big part of habitat management for whitetail deer is increasing food resources. But typically, landowners are focused mostly on food resources during hunting season. But that's actually not when deer have the highest nutritional demands. You need to think about the full calendar year, particularly food that is going to be available during the early summer when they're developing antlers or when they're nursing fawns. These are when they really have incredibly high nutrition demands. And so if you want to increase food resources during the whole year, you need to think about more than just a food plot. Do this through creating forested openings or thinning our forest. A simple way is to pick areas on your property that are eastern red cedar. Usually those areas have very little in the understory for whitetails. In those spots we can just cut the cedar down and burn, which is what's been done here, and we'll get a flush of important deer forages like ragweed, partridge pea, pokeweed, and then if you just maintain that with fire maybe once every 3 to 7 years, you can keep that in a composition that'll really be beneficial for deer and meet their nutritional needs. You can also go into oak forest and thin those, either mechanically cutting them and then burning, or using some selective herbicide to create openings in the forest and try to get that canopy cover down so that more sunlight reaches the forest floor and you get that response of food resources. So think about nutrition beyond just the hunting season. Think about what deer actually are consuming throughout the year, which is mostly forbs, broadleaf plants, and vines and shrubs. They do not consume a lot of grasses, so if your property is dense grass, you might think about practices like prescribed fire that can get more broadleaf plants on the property.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, joins us now. Kim, the coronavirus, of course, making big news everywhere. Let's talk about possible impact on the markets.
Well, when you read what the analysts have to say, they're saying that they're having a negative impact on the commodity markets. But if you look at the forward contract prices, say for wheat, on January the 21st versus the current price. Wheat was at $4.85. It's down to $4.67. It's down 18 cents. Corn was $3.71. It's now $3.65, down 6 cents. Soybeans down 31 cents from $8.61 to $8.30. And cotton down a penny from 71 to 70. Now you can say that's coronavirus, but I think there's other things going on in the market. I think the coronavirus has had a minor impact, and it's something that we can easily talk about.
What are some of those other things that you mentioned?
Well, if you look at it, I think a big thing going on right now, especially for wheat, is in France and the European Union, the trucker and the dock workers strikes. One importing country told their suppliers not to buy wheat from the European Union because there was a case of not delivering that. You've got Russia that they've reported that they're going to limit exports. But if you look at Russian exports, they're 13% below last year's level. That's 126 million bushels. But Ukraine is 34% above last year. They're both Black Sea exporters. That's 154 million above. So they're 28 million ahead of exports out of the Black Sea. So you got to ignore things like that. The Brazilian soybean harvest, it's getting started a little slow. It's wet down there, and they're having to back that off, but it's coming on. India, it was reported this week, may harvest a record wheat crop. Now they'll export a little bit and they import a little bit, so I don't know that that'll have much impact. But I don't think there's any major change going on, and I think that's what the prices have told us.
Well, let's talk about any good news that you've observed recently.
Well, if you look at the world wheat ending stocks, they're a record. If you look at the world stocks-to-use ratio, it's a record. If you look at the United States ending stocks, it's not record, but it's still above average along with the stocks-to-use ratio. But if you look at the Black Sea area, their stocks-to-use ratio is 10%. That means when they start their harvest on July 1, they will have 32 days worth of wheat in the bin, and that means that there's the potential, if they have problems with their crop, that prices will take off and that we'll have a big price increase there. So if there's good news, it's what's going on in the Black Sea. And also there's an underlying current or underlying talk that there's a shortage of milling quality wheat in the world, and I think that's why we've seen our prices increase over the last few months.
Okay, Kim, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.
A couple of weeks ago on the Cow-Calf Corner, we visited with you about the impact of a prolonged calving process, or a prolonged stage 2 of calving, the impact it would have on the cow. And we talked about how if that goes on and on and on, that cow will be slower to come back into estrus and have a smaller chance to become pregnant in the upcoming breeding season. Well, let's this week visit about what that prolonged calving process would mean to the calf. We know that as that calf passes through the birth canal, at some point in time the umbilical cord will be trapped against the pelvic rim of the cow as she's expelling that calf from her reproductive tract. Each time she has a contraction, each time that umbilical cord is trapped against the pelvic rim, then for a few seconds at least that calf is in a situation where he can't get oxygen from the mother's blood supply, he can't get rid of carbon dioxide back to the mother's supply, and over time what happens is what the veterinarians or the scientists call respiratory acidosis. That means that the calf's own blood then can become somewhat acidic. If it is severe enough and lasts long enough, that can cause some damage to some of the organs of the calf, including the calf's brain. Ranchers sometimes will talk about having a calf that was born during a difficult birthing process that eventually they call a dummy calf, because he quite frankly acts very differently, is hard to work with. We think there's probably been some brain damage just due to the hypoxia or lack of oxygen that occurred for a period of time during the calving process. Also, calves that have been acidotic, those that have this high acidity in the bloodstream, will be more sluggish, they'll be slower to get up, therefore slower to find the teat, to have a chance to nurse, and get that very important colostrum that calf needs to get the antibodies to help protect them against such things as calf diarrhea. That's why if you notice in your herd that perhaps you see more calf scours, calf diarrhea from calves born to 2-year-olds than you might see from mother cows. And that can be for 2 reasons. That long delivery process causing the respiratory acidosis in the calf, plus the fact that the new 2-year-old mother just isn't giving as much milk as that older cow. So I think what we can learn from this is, yes, there is a reason to provide assistance. If we see that 2-year-old that isn't making real progress in an hour of the calving process, let's go ahead and bring her in, examine, and see if we can provide assistance, get that calf going, and having a better chance to get the colostrum that he needs early in life. As we've said before, if you're watching a mature cow and she isn't making real progress in a half an hour, then we probably need to examine her because there's probably something wrong. If we'll make sure that those calves get off to a better start, get that colostrum as soon as possible, we'll have a healthier calf, not only in the early part of life, but now research tells us that they'll be healthier even as they go on into the later stages of the beef production cycle, be less likely to get respiratory disease, say as they go into a feedlot. That early assistance or proper timing of assistance can be real helpful, not only to the mother in terms of getting her rebred, but to the health of that calf. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Had a nice drink of water across the state, and Josh, that's really been beneficial to the crops across Oklahoma.
Yeah, those areas of dryness we've been talking about, they're shrinking, but they're still there. The good thing is we are getting some moisture to areas. We are getting some of the ground a little saturated, allow those winter crops to start moving when we get the heat. You know, we're still missing those 2 parts, the moisture and the heat. So the rain's good, the snow's good, and all that. We just need a little bit more heat for it to be effective.
This recent moisture was kind of a soaking rain. We kind of needed that to fill up the soil profile. How are the moisture contents looking kind of deeper where the roots need it?
Well, it's gonna be really dependent on where you were, what you had last season. We've noted historically that where we have a summer crop going into a winter crop, our subsoil profile's quite a bit depleted because that's where a lot of the roots were during the summer. And when we had those really dry spells later on into the summer, right before we went into harvest, we did have that. The good thing is our fall, for a bulk majority of the state, and we still have some areas that still haven't received a substantial amount of rain since summer. So in those areas, we're fairly depleted still yet. Even in our areas where we've gotten a lot of moisture, we could still have some deeper profiles that are a little depleted. However, we're probably working on that pretty good, especially since a lot of our winter crops aren't growing substantially fast. They didn't get a whole lot of growth in the fall. So moisture status for a bulk of the downstate area is probably pretty good, if not a little excessive by what you see here. But we're working towards good things. Like I said, we just need that other component for our things like our canola, our cover crops, and our wheat.
Speaking of canola, what are some of the things producers need to be thinking about moving forward? Because we're not out of the cold yet. There's still some potential for some issues to come up with canola.
Yeah, so like as opposed to wheat, which we have a fairly open window to make those in-season nitrogen applications, other things, canola, especially any that received a lot of growth, and I have to say we were in this field not but a couple months ago and the canola was very small. Right. You can see the canola is still growing little bit by little bit. Every day we get a nice warm spell, we are growing. So depending on how much growth it has, if it doesn't have a whole lot of above ground tissue burned off, you know, we don't see a lot of it right now, so if we don't get a really sharp cold spell, we could potentially see it going reproductive very quickly. So that means growers that have canola need to be thinking about a couple of things. That last glyphosate application or last herbicide application, most of our herbicides are cut off around that bolting, if not early flowering, and then getting that fertility on the field, because once again, our reproductive structures are what makes the yield. Once we have those out in the field, we're going to just be losing yield more and more the more we don't have nitrogen out there. So especially in these areas like we have behind us that have been really flooded, have a lot of water standing on it, maybe you've had a lot of water work through it, make sure you have your nitrogen out there, because we might not have a whole lot left if you put any in the fall. But then for canola, that window is very narrow, so we need to make sure that we're very proactive when we see that warming trend start to hit us.
Coming up in the next month or so, are there opportunities for some last minute plantings of crops that could possibly just hold the soil together?
Yeah, I mean, there's always those conversation of oats. We typically see some of the small grains go in the spring. Oats is the big one. It's one that, because we get such rapid early growth, that folks that maybe don't have a wheat pasture that are wanting to take that wheat to grain still need something for their cattle to graze on. Oats is still that option. We have some of our other small grains that are there, but oats are going to be your primary one. And then, I mean, speaking of, Dave, we're at the end of January. Right. Even though we're out here in Coates, we're maybe 2 months away from corn planting. So it's already starting to think about getting the fallow fields burned down, getting that ready for corn, for milo, soybeans, cotton, whatever you're thinking about going into. But we're not that far away from working in our planting, especially of corn, which is typically our first summer to go in.
And one of the important things there is to really look at the overall picture of the cropping system, not just being reactionary. Hey, I have this isn't working right now, I want to till that up, I want to put something in. Just look at the overall picture.
Yeah, because we do have some crops that work well in a rotation with others, and then we have to remember we have herbicide restrictions that also play a big role into that. So maybe you grew soybean last year and you had an herbicide that may not allow you go maybe into cotton or sesame, but you have to remember those herbicide restrictions, and you have to remember, well, I was in a low residue crop of cotton maybe last year, maybe I'll go to sesame. Well, you're not adding that residue, and so you're gonna have open soil there, which from a soil management, soil health, soil conservation standpoint is something that we're concerned with. So having that big picture, like you said, in mind is there. We always have to worry about economics and make it work out on paper. So there are a couple things going on, but there are quite a few options, and hopefully we have a couple of months for those to kind of shake out on themselves.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Josh Lofton, Cropping System Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Of the essential nutrients, nitrogen is the most commonly applied. We have several source options when it comes to both homeowners and ag producers, and there's often several questions when it comes to what are the different sources and what are the importance and the different characteristics. So one of the most commonly sold sources of nitrogen in Oklahoma is anhydrous ammonia. Anhydrous ammonia is a gas form with 82% nitrogen for every pound. So every 100 pounds of anhydrous ammonia, we're going to have 82 pounds of nitrogen. It goes in the soil as a gas, and it immediately reacts with H2O, any water into the soil, and it's going to form NH4 and hold onto the soil particle. Then we have urea. Urea is our number 2 and sometimes number 1 fertilizer source. It is by far the greatest dry source. Urea is 46% nitrogen. It's popular because A, it has the highest concentration of nitrogen of a dry product and is fairly safe. So urea comes in with NH2CO. It's applied in the soil. It gets wet. Urease, an enzyme, is going to act upon these particles right here, break off the CO and go NH2 and turn that into NH3, which then reacts with water and goes to NH4. The challenge with urea, while it's a very safe and easy to store dry product, if urea is not incorporated into the soil via tillage or irrigation, there's high probability that with a little bit of moisture, this NH3 can actually be lost in the environment. So in agriculture and in other aspects, we're always concerned about nitrogen losses from the application of urea if we don't get a good incorporation. Another less common source of nitrogen is the ammonium sulfate, and this is commonly applied with urea when there's a sulfur demand. Why is it not just applied solely? Because there's only 21% nitrogen. However, ammonium sulfate is a very stable source, but it has the highest acidifying reaction rate as compared to any other nitrogen source, because our source for ammonium sulfate, when we apply directly as a ammonium, goes back to our acidifying factors, and ammonium converts and releases more hydrogen than any other of these sources that start out as an NH3. So our most acidifying fertilizer for nitrogen is ammonium sulfate. There are also other sources such as UAN. So UAN stands for urea ammonium nitrate. UAN is a liquid fertilizer source. So it comes in as either a 32% nitrogen or 28% nitrogen with no other nutrients. We'll often use them as top dress or sprayed on as top dress or injected into the soil. It is half urea, half ammonium nitrate, blended in and watered down. These are our primary nitrogen-containing fertilizers that we would use across Oklahoma in agriculture and in the garden. If you have any other questions about nitrogen, check out the SUNUP website at www.sunup.okstate.edu.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.